Thank you for the introduction and for inviting me to join you all today. It's really exciting to be part of these discussions. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with UK research and innovation, but just in case there are some of you who aren't, I wanted to share a quick overview. So UKRI launched just over 2 years ago now, and we're effectively a non-departmental public body sponsored by the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, or BEIS. Our organisation brings together the 7 disciplinary research councils, formerly part of Research Councils UK, along with Research England, which is responsible for supporting research and knowledge exchange at higher education institutes, and the UK's innovation agency, Innovate UK. So to give you a sense of the scale and breadth of the work that we support, we have a combined budget of about £6.5 billion per year, and that goes to supporting a large range of research grants, knowledge exchange activities, studentships and fellowships, and other capacity building activities. And those awards go to a range of different UK universities and research organisations. And increasingly, we're also awarding more international development projects directly to overseas institutions as well. In terms of ODA or development research, UKRI delivers 2 of the main ODA funds. That's the Newton Fund and the Global Challenges Research Fund, or GCRF, of which the hubs that we're hearing from today are part of. And both of those funds primarily support cutting-edge research designed to deliver development impact through partnership. But that both of those funds also have an important focus on capacity building and knowledge exchange activities through those partnerships as well. So the equitable partnerships that we're talking about today are a really important part of both of these funds. And from a UKRI perspective, there are a number of different principles that underpin these. That's around distribution of resources, responsibilities and benefits, about ethical data sharing and use, and responsiveness to the needs of society and the communities and participants that we're working with. There's also a piece about the way we work together, so mutual respect, effective communications, constructive ways of working and shared learning. And finally, about recognising the value of different inputs, interests and goals across the partnership. So working with a number of different projects across our portfolios, it's highlighted some key things which seem to be common to good, strong partnerships. Those around joint agenda setting, making sure there's clarity of roles and responsibilities, giving fair recognition to the interests and incentives of different partners involved, building mutual trust, and that relates to transparency and accountability. Maintaining regular communication, which is something that obviously at the moment is particularly important and maybe slightly more challenging than usual. Investing time in the partnership and viewing it as a long-term process and trying to build sustainability into that as well. And then 2 of the things that are important but maybe less obvious are around regularly reviewing the health or the kind of quality of the partnership, which hopefully we'll hear a bit more about in a minute, and agreeing upfront how to deal with disputes or conflicts should they arise during the partnership. Lastly, I just wanted to highlight that UKRI aren't the only ones thinking about equitable partnerships. Obviously, yourselves and your institutions and your partners are thinking about that as well. But also our colleagues at the UK Collaborative on Development Research have recently undertaken community consultation around this. And that again highlighted the importance of fairness and equity in building strong partnerships, and particularly in mitigating risks and supporting those safeguarding approaches and principles that we're all working with. I think also it highlighted the importance here in terms of trying to reduce or start to address some of those potential power imbalances within the partnership as well. There are several frameworks and tools out there that give us different perspectives and approaches for for how to build healthy and equitable partnerships, which might be things that you want to have a look at when thinking about your own work and collaborations. But hopefully later on in this session, we're going to hear lots of useful learnings and reflections from projects who are trying to do this in reality on the ground and get their insights into what makes good partnerships in practice. Thank you.
Really, the idea of looking at ways in which to identify interventions that improve multiple outcomes came out of work of Lucy Kluver as the director of the Hub and others in the Hub, with policymakers, many of them in governments and in the African Union, with academics across the continent, and even in consultations with adolescents through other work that people in the Hub were involved in. We often talk about co-creation, but really it was the co-identification, if you like, the joint identification of the problem that really laid the foundation for the whole idea. So even before the proposal was born, these conversations have been happening. I think that really helped us a lot. And then from the very beginning, we've tried to note the importance of structure, and so that the Hub has really been based as to the extent that we can as a joint initiative led by Oxford and University of Cape Town. So trying to bring in a large sort of African presence in the overall structure to facilitate the equity of partnerships. And leadership matters, and so the Hub is divided into work package, and half of those work package leads are based at African institutions. Here we're talking about institutions. I mean, if we took a broader view and said to what proportion of the Hub leadership is originally from Africa, then the proportion is larger. But we're just talking about from the institutional perspective, and I'll come back to that. From the very beginning, we wanted to focus on capacity sharing, not building. Was an important point we wanted to make, is that there are lessons to be learned in both directions, and that it shouldn't be seen purely in a capacity building effort from the Hub. And indeed, we try to reflect that by leading our capacity sharing section is led by a Kenyan institution to reflect our belief that really that sharing goes both ways. And in our case, and I'll come back at the end to talk about who are we talking about in these partnerships, but we wanted to have a key role for adolescents. And so we ensured from the very beginning that there was ongoing and resourced adolescent engagement, and so that could lay the foundation for our partnerships. But foundations are great, but they need to be built on. So we have established an Equitable Partnerships Committee. We have since incorporated it into what we call the Hub Values Committee. We had a gender committee and an environments committee, and we felt that an environment committee, we felt that it was more useful to bring them all together to help share with ideas, but also to be able to have these discussions across a wider group of people. And one of the key things which came up, which I thought worth pulling out, was in the early discussions with the Equitable Partnerships Committee, was that it was brought out very strongly that we shouldn't treat all institutions as the same, and that the partnerships between UCT, for example, and many of the other African-based institutions who are contracting then through UCT is also a question, is that they're not all the partnerships within Africa are equal to. And so we've brought that as a key focus to ensure that our equitable partnerships don't just assume a sort of north-south or Africa-UK pattern, that we also look at the partnerships within Africa as well, and to what extent they are equitable. And then incorporating equitable partnerships into the monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework is something that's ongoing work. We're trying as far as possible to build on existing work. People have tried to deal with this before, and as mentioned in the previous presentation, there are many frameworks, many indicators identified, and we're really trying to build on those rather than develop anything from scratch. So then just to highlight some of the challenges. So we wanted, as I said, from the very beginning to build on those partnerships that we had, on that co-identification, but then we're limited by our networks. And so, a lot of people within the Hub, of course, have networks across many African countries, but not all. And that did constrain us, so that we then had to actively go out and try and find partners in areas that we wanted to include and didn't have networks in, and then to bring those partners in an equitable way when they are coming to it later, some of the ideas are already formed, you don't have an existing relationship to build on, was a challenge and something worth thinking about, and something that I think we've dealt with quite well. We have brought in new partners, but was definitely a challenge that we had to deal with. And then, of course, the challenge that often comes up with monitoring and evaluation frameworks is how to make them meaningful and not simply a tick box exercise. We can identify these indicators and people can play to them, if you like, to make sure that they are met. But is that really what we're looking for? We want to monitor something meaningful, and so to keep an eye on that is very, very important to us, and it's the work of the committee. And being realistic about what we can achieve in 5 years, in that we can't rectify all the inequities that are there. And so we have to think about what to prioritize, or if we do prioritize, what to prioritize. And that, again, is the ongoing work of the Equitable Partnerships Committee, or at least that portion of the Values Committee dealing with that. And then just simply keeping it on the agenda. As anyone involved in large projects knows, time constraints and distractions are difficult, and people get busy and things fall away. And if it's not something that somebody is on the email demanding from you, it can be lost sight of. And so just keeping it relevant, keeping it in people's minds has, again, been a key challenge of ours. And one that has come up too is how one responds to issues. So Black Lives Matter has been a major force in 2020, and many people within the hub wanted to make sure that we as the hub also responded to that, and that has important issues when we're thinking about equitable partnerships, particularly with an Africa-focused hub. And then more broadly, what does that make us think about systemic racism and what we do about that? But then we get into some complications that people have raised within the hub. Well, Black Lives Matter is hugely important, but it's a US-based response, and it has spread to other countries. But is it appropriate to spread the same sort of response to Africa? We have perhaps things which are originating in different ways, and there may be different problems. And so, is that an imposition? And so just to say that it wasn't always straightforward, and people had pushed back to say to what extent does the hub respond to these issues, and how do you deal with that when it's also across institutions? And so in that particular exercise, we have taken different approaches to avoid the idea of imposing anything on others, and we've done quite a sort of thorough, in-depth set of interventions and discussions within the lead institutions where we have full-time staff employed by the hub. So within Oxford, within UCT, we've been doing quite intensive work around systemic racism. But then with the wider hub and the wider partners, we've taken a softer approach to conduct surveys and discussions about what they think we should be doing and what would be helpful to them, and how we might think about these things together. And so different approaches there when these new issues arise, and taking the time to talk to people about how best to move them forward. So then just a few reflections and issues perhaps for discussion. I mean, we have to ask with equitable partnerships to what extent, the existing power dynamics and the source and the nature of the funding limit the realization of equitable partnerships. I mean, in the end, we can only do so much. The whole structure, we're trying to address, major disparities between institutions. The money is obviously flowing from the UK, and to what extent that shapes all the relationships. Institutions, particularly in the African context, who are relying on the funding, to what extent are they able to express their view and feel that they are negotiating on equal footing when the funding is so important to their survival, and potentially they don't have the resources to push on certain issues? And how to also balance that with the responsibility. The funding is structured that it comes from the UK. So, the UK institution, in this case, Oxford, has a particular responsibility to account for the funding. And to what extent does that additional responsibility then require certain power dynamics in order to be able to fulfill that responsibility? So how much can we fix, with all of our good intentions and our partnerships? We have to be sort of aware of these issues. And an issue which comes up often that at least I think about personally is what I call the risk of liberal racism, which is essentially where which is I've generally thought about on an individual level, but it comes up in equitable partnerships. To what extent people are held to a lower bar as an apparent act of kindness, which is itself a form of racism or a form of inequity, is to assume incompetence and to assume that there needs to be a lower bar. And so in an effort that is often seen as a nice thing, as a helpful thing, as an understanding thing, is in fact a patronizing thing and something which is not helpful. And so to recognize power imbalances, to recognize resource imbalances, but at the same time not to slip into setting an inappropriately low bar. And much of this discussion that I've been having here, of course, focuses on institutions, but of course, people are in these institutions. So to what extent are we looking at the equity between the people in these institutions? What extent are we looking at partnerships of different kinds? We have partners in multilateral major organizations through to NGOs, and how do we think about the equity at all of those different levels? And even down, we've highlighted adolescent engagement, but for example, why not engagement with the families of adolescents? If I had adolescent children and some researchers turned up to talk to them and ask them, for their views on certain policies, I'd also hope that they would talk to me as well. And maybe that stretches to community leaders and so forth. So we talk about the equitable partnerships as the partnerships between institutions, but we just want to say that to think about to what extent is it between people, these different partners, and when we do engagement with the beneficiaries, if you like, to what extent that needs to be broader as well. And then to bring it back right round to say, to what extent can we really make this as meaningful an exercise as possible? And we are really committed as a hub to doing that. But we're recognizing at the same time that we're constrained by larger structures, and we have to be realistic while hopeful. Just to say, thank you very much. Look forward to the rest of the discussions.
Oh, Chris, that was great. That was a really wonderful start off into this whole debate. So thank you very much for that. Okay, our next two speakers are from the ARISE Hub. Sally Theobald is Professor of Social Science and International Health at the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine. She's the PI of the GCRF ARISE Hub, which is accountability and responsiveness. Let me see if I can get my screen back. In informal settlements for equity, which includes partnerships in Bangladesh, India, Kenya, and Sierra Leone. She's a social scientist with over 25 years experience of collaborative research projects focusing on gender, equity, health system strengthening, and systems in different contexts, including fragility and informal urban settlements in Africa and Asia. And Lynette Okuth is a senior technical advisor, community health and safeguarding lead at LVCT Health in Kenya. She's part of the ARISE team, and she's the ARISE safeguarding lead. She has a really interesting background. She's got extensive experience in policy engagement at both the national and community levels. She's got over 10 years of experience in HIV/AIDS, TB, HIV, nutrition, reproductive health, family planning, malaria, maternal, and newborn and child health programming. And Lynette is passionate about making the voice of community members heard and involved in decision making. Welcome, Sally and Lynette.
Thank you so much, Claire. And Chris, it was a great presentation, and I think there's some similarities in our reflections. And I want to thank Claire and others for this opportunity. As Chris said, I think there are a number of global structural challenges and inequities that do mitigate, that bring challenges to equitable partnerships. And we need to be deliberative, we need to be reflective, and we need to share experiences across and between different partnerships so that we can learn from each other. So I welcome the opportunity to share and to learn and to engage. So just to tell you a little bit about the ARISE Hub then. So we focus on health, wellbeing and accountability in informal settlements and spaces, also colloquially known as slums. Here's our partnerships. So we work in partnership with researchers, practitioners, and also Slum and Shack Dwellers International, which is a federation of people living and working in slums in 33 different countries. So we work in partnership in Kenya, in Sierra Leone, in India, and in Bangladesh. We're led out of Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, and then we have additional UK-based partnerships too. Here is our theory of change. It's a little bit small for you to read, but just to show you where we are aiming to go, what are the different pathways for action. And at a local level, we're looking at improved equity and rights to health and well-being in informal action sites in our different countries and beyond through our responsive fund at a subnational level, embedding uptake of approaches to develop multi-sectoral policy and practice to promote equity and rights, and at the global level, multi-sectoral or global action. So like Chris and the Accelerate Hub, one of the very first things that we did was to agree shared values early on, and we did this in the proposal writing stage. So we were lucky enough to come together as a partnership when we got shortlisted to full proposal, with all partners represented, to do co-writing, co-creation of the proposal, and to agree through a participatory exercise what were the values that we wanted to try to live by to underpin our hub as we move forward together. And Sian, you talked about reviewing the health of the partnership or the partnership process. So that's one of the processes that we've been going through and what I want to share next in the next couple of slides. So we had an online anonymous questionnaire for everyone involved in the hub. We've done it once so far. We're going to repeat it at regular intervals. So here is one analysis on one set of questions, which is around equitable and sustainable partnerships. And you can see the extent to which people agree or disagree with these types of statements. And then there's a comments box so that you can get additional information as well. So as you can see here, mostly people agree or strongly agree with these statements, but there are some areas of concern. So one of those is around power to influence decisions. The other is around relationships and how hierarchy plays out. So what we've done in response to that is make some changes to our management committee. So we have the ARISE executive, which has the PIs from all the different institutions. It's the main decision-making body. We now have representation from our early career researcher group on that, which rotates. So all of the early career researchers will sit on that management committee at some point. Here's the next one that we were concerned about. So clearly we're not alone in being affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. It's played out in complex and worrying ways in different informal settlements. And we've had people affected by COVID, long COVID, in all of our teams. So we were, prior to this, we set up a counselling system whereby anyone in the ARISE hub could request counselling. And there was a budget for that. It was just a very simple form that went to our programme manager. You could then have counselling in country, or in one of our country contexts, it's very hard to access counselling. So we have online counselling available from a really experienced counsellor in Liverpool. And when this came up again as an issue, we promoted that counselling option again, as we needed to make sure everyone was aware of it. And we're having further discussions, including through our early career researcher group, around how we can improve here, how we can make amendments. So this partnership health check, I think it's a good way to be responsive, to check in, to understand how people are feeling, and to make adaptations as appropriate. In terms of management structures, so as you know, Chris said, well, we have our early career research, we have 7 PhDs from Africa and Asia linked to the ARISE Hub who were funded through the LSTM contribution. And we've tried to really ensure equity and ownership in terms of how our systems and processes work, in terms of ownership of thematic working groups and the way hub meetings are organised. We also have safeguarding leads. So Lynette is the safeguarding lead for LBCT Health and Care. She'll tell you more about that. We have safeguarding check-ins on a regular basis, again, to share experiences there. And some other thoughts that might be helpful. So responsiveness to COVID-19. And I think COVID-19 has shed the spotlight on partnerships, on relationships, on trust. We've tried to be responsive, right? At the very beginning, we collected questions that people had from Slum Dwellers International and put them in an interview to one of our colleagues who's a consultant in the front line in COVID-19 in Liverpool, who also worked in informal settlements, to have a dialogue. We've had a lot of exchange, a lot of webinars, a lot of sharing of experience about what has worked less well in responding to COVID-19 across and between different informal settlements. We've worked hard on data ownership and on publication guidelines to try and ensure inclusivity there. And this is a slide from our brilliant communication lead from Arise, Kate Hawkins, to just give you a sense of some of the communication activities. And we've tried to incorporate traditional and emerging methods of engaging across the hub. So some of our blogs have been written by co-researchers who live and work in informal settlements. We've made films, we've had Twitter chats on COVID-19 and disability. And there's Lynette's colleague there who's explaining that in sign language, and photo exercises with people living and working in slum settlements. So trying to use communication as a way to bring out diverse voices. And now I'm handing over to Lynette to talk about some safeguarding and some learning there that links to equitable partnerships. Thanks.
Yeah. So thank you, everyone, and thanks, Sally, for the good startup to our presentation. Good afternoon to all of us. Just before I dive into the slides, I'd want to just share a few learnings about early career researchers. And just to say that we've been able to match both the seasoned and the early career researchers, so that there's a lot of learning and co-facilitation. They've been able to support the country teams, and we've been able to allow all discussions to have contribution from both early career researchers and seasoned researchers to allow learning. In the context of safeguarding, we've been able to train all our core researchers on safeguarding and to ensure that we're in a position to actually have high index for safeguarding concerns and report and have a good referral directory to report such safeguarding concerns. So back to my slides, I just want to share that in front of you are the safeguarding leads from Bangladesh, India, Kenya, Sierra Leone, and the UK. This was a photo that you took in Bangladesh during our annual hub meeting. Our second slide is about that was our first Arise Hub publication in collaboration with all the colleagues in the hub. And as you can see, it reads how to prevent and address safeguarding concerns in global health research programs, practice, process and positionality in marginalized spaces. So I want to share some of the key learnings from the publication. And one of the things that we've learned is that one, we have a lot of overlapping concerns around safeguarding, ethics, health and safety. Now, number two, we have a lot of challenges of referral and support for safeguarding concerns, especially in our underserved informal and urban spaces. We also realize that there's a lot of importance of reflective practice and critical thinking about power, judgment and positionality, and ownership of global narrative surrounding safeguarding. We also, and our last learning around the paper is we debate on decolonizing science and argue on the importance of an interactive ongoing learning journey that is critical, reflective, and inclusive of vulnerable population, which I think is something that is very important for us to pick as a key learning. On to our next slide.
We can see the next slide now, Lynette.
Okay, so our next slide talks of, is about, you can see a web of safeguarding, and one of the things that we did is that we went through a process, just have a working definition of safeguarding, just to understand what are the vulnerabilities, risks, and mitigation strategies. And that's how we ended up with the so many ideas, so many names surrounding safeguarding, so that to allow us to understand how best to go through it. Secondly, as a hub, we are able to partner with the University of Liverpool on a UKCDR funded piece of work on safeguarding. And two of our colleagues that is been to Ensureka actually were part of the colleagues that were involved in the interviews that led into the first document, Guidance on Safeguarding in International Development Research. Then we involved in the application of the UKCDR safeguarding guidance during COVID-19. And lastly, report on phase 2 international consultations. Our next slide talks about our hub colleagues. And as you can see, we are a happy family as a hub from all the countries. Yeah, we are a happy family and working together to ensure that we actually serve our underserved populations in urban informal settlements. And lastly is to appreciate GCRF, acknowledge GCRF and their RISE Hub partners in Kenya, India, Bangladesh, and the UK. Thank you very much.
Okay, Sally and Lynette, that was great. I think we should probably go to questions because we're going to run out of time.
Hello there. Thank you very much. And I should first of all declare that I am not an innocent bystander. I am Sierra Leonean and I'm also an employee of LIDC. So my question is, first of all, thank you. What great presentations. What a way to wake us up on this grey Monday afternoon in COVID London. I'm so grateful that I got to hear what you had to say. And my interest was particularly piqued by Chris Desmond's presentation, which was so informative, but I couldn't help notice something that was left out. And I was particularly drawn to this because I'm Sierra Leonean, but also have a bit of Lebanese, so very traditional societies where women tend to defer to men. So I was very happy that he talked about BLM and systemic racism and liberal racism and holding people to the same standards. But I was curious to know, as an African woman who comes from a tradition where excuses are often made for men taking leadership and putting themselves in leadership positions and owning research and claiming things that they might not be entitled to claim, how we can ensure that women, particularly women from societies like the ones that I come from, are enabled to take their full seat at the table. So that's one question. I have others, but I need to let other people have a chance to speak. So thank you.
Should I jump right in, or do you want to take a few?
please.
So I mean, thank you for that question. I mean, we couldn't agree more. I mean, what we've done as the hub, though, is, and it's a question which I would love to hear others' comments on, is we had a gender committee, and now agenda is a standing part of the hub values committee. So we look at gender issues throughout the hub. So for exactly the reasons that you describe. And so we've tried to be very active in ensuring that in terms of gender representation in decision making, in power structure, and I think that we've done it particularly well on. But that we do then have a committee, not only for the relationships, but we also ask all research projects as a standard thing to present on issues related to gender, both within their analysis and within their teams at every presentation that they make, because we do think this is a key issue, and it's become quite a core component of much of our work. So, for example, we're looking at the use of Black consciousness philosophy from Steve Biko in designing adolescent interventions for adolescents. And one of the main things that come up is that, you know, Black consciousness in 1970s South Africa was an incredibly sexist theory. And so first having to address that. So it's something we deal with head on. Perhaps its absence is in the presentation is more emphasis, more a result of that emphasis that it has its own committee. But yes, thank for the opportunity to clarify that. It's very important.
Sally, do you want to add to that?
I think gender and gendered asymmetries and roles are so critical, and we try to have reflective spaces on that. We have a gender lens in our work. We have an intersectional focus in terms of how we move forward, and we've thought a lot about gender and power relationships in communities in terms of COVID-19 and safeguarding. So the paper that Lynette shared was our learning prior to COVID. We're updating that right now. And I think gender asymmetries have come to the fore in COVID-19, and the rise in sexual and gender-based violence is something that we are continually discussing, and as safeguarding leads, and Shireen, you might be interested in our learning from Sierra Leone there. So as we move towards digital interviews at the peak of the pandemic, how do you understand if distress is happening? How do you know in that context when you're not entirely sure who else is in the room when you do the interview? So our safeguarding lead from the College of Medicine and Allied Health Sciences in Freetown, Bintu, who was part of the UKCDR process, she's innovating with a statement that you can say on a call, which is, "I've spilt the palm oil," which means I am experiencing distress. Please. That's like a distress call. Like we see, you know, this is something that's used as a distress call in when you can see each other in global norms, but that's an innovation from Sierra Leone. So we have to think about gender continually, how it intersects with other axes of inequity. COVID-19 has shone the spotlight on sexual and gender-based violence, and that I thought was an interesting innovation from Sierra Leone. Thanks. But Lynette, maybe, do you have anything to add? I mean, you work absolutely on these areas. I got a bit carried away with the Sierra Leone example, sorry.
Yes, I think also in Kenya, we have a program on gender-based violence, and to agree with the team, we have a lot of gender-based violence against children, and this has been in the rise during COVID. So what we've done as a country, as a hub, is to have we have a robust referral directory, and more to it, we also have a toll number where we sensitize all the populations that we work with to ensure that they get this message through the toll number, and they can also call for counseling and other related services. Thank you, and over.
Okay, that's brilliant. We have a question from Claire Borg. Claire, do you want to say your question?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, it's Claire Burke. I'm based at Queen Mary University of London, but also work with partners in Zambia and Zimbabwe. And I guess my question is to do with the first key message, the equitable partnerships requiring strong foundations. And I wonder if those speakers who've been working within core funded hubs could speak to those of us who are working, I guess, in more sort of ongoing or initiating partner contexts, where we're working more research project to research project, which intrinsically, I guess, is less of a strong foundation. How do we build in or how do you suggest that we build in some of these strong foundations to make our partnerships of higher quality in a more unstable funding context?
That's just a very, very difficult question, and I think that you really hit, I mean, a key issue. I mean, we do have and the space within the hubs to do something. When I say, I try to say that, you know, we have to be quite cautious about what we could do even within 5 years in a well-funded exercise. But what you can do partnership to partnership is it just extremely difficult. And I think it goes back to that idea of really identifying that relationship and building on that relationship and trying to see yourself as somewhat in it together. You know, having worked in these, you know, in soft-funded African institutions most of my professional life, you know, we have very different experiences of the international partners, those who come to us as data collection agents and will drop us the moment there's a difficult time, and those who come as genuine partners. And you tend to know who those are fairly quickly. And so those relationships are built up as genuine partnerships. Just having that sense that you're in it together has always been what I see as the foundation. I mean, it's a fairly vague answer just because it is so difficult, but really to say from my point of view, just focusing on that relationship and trying to see people as real partners and not as a subsidiary.
My reflection would be, what can we do in different formats to build trust? And I think it is harder in shorter term projects. And I think we're very privileged in the hub to have that longer term funding. In our hub, we had some partners that had worked together, some that hadn't, some we'd worked with, some we hadn't. So it's a constellation of different types of partnerships. And I think we were very lucky that we also managed some face-to-face meetings. We had a launch in Kenya, then we had the meeting in Bangladesh, which Lynette showed you the photos of, where we were able to build relationships together. And I think they've helped us in this period of time when we can't travel, in terms of having a lot of interactions over Zoom, over Teams, and having built relationships already. I think that helps with the challenge of not being face to face. But yeah, that's a reflection. Lynette, anything to add?
I'd say from the Action Against Stunting Hub perspective, we, in some of our reflections may be quite useful for this particular example, we tried to design equity in the structure of the hub. So if you had a post in the UK, there was a matching post in one of the partner countries. So if you were a theme lead in the UK, you had theme leads in the partner countries. If you were a male person in the UK, you had male leads. So what we did is we created a very lateral structure across our hub. So every grouping had a group of colleagues that were exactly at the same level, exactly doing the same things. So we tried to make it less sort of top down. And I'd actually say that that was really successful. That's been a really good way to kind of, you just design in equity and then it kind of unfolds. But I would also agree with what Sally was saying. Over the course of this pandemic, we had always anticipated in our hub that in the beginning we would start out with a lot of these, you know, much of our hub around the Action Against Stunting hub is about an observational cohort. There's a lot of kind of intense science. We always thought that this bit, there would be a front end where a lot of it was north-south, and then we would transfer kind of learning, sharing, and all that over to our southern partners. So that was always kind of in the plan. And what's happened with COVID is we've realized that, exactly as Sally said, through all of these kinds of, you know, every single week we were in Zoom meetings with all, you know, we built relationships around all of these activities that we really wouldn't have had time for under normal circumstances. I mean, we mapped 27,000 samples across, you know, 3 countries. So we created this kind of working atmosphere that I think will stand us in really good stead going forward. So I think that you can design inequity, and I think that it's fortuitous that some opportunities can create a much closer working relationship. So, I mean, from that perspective, COVID hasn't been bad for us. But there was some other questions. Shireen, can you call out the hand?
Could we go to Lucy Gray, please? Because she has a question that she'd like to ask immediately, if she can, because she has to leave shortly. Thank you. Lucy, over to you.
Thanks very much. Thank you, everyone. Those were great presentations. I work for INTRAC, and I'm supporting the water security and sustainable development hub, and I'm helping them with their monitoring, evaluation and learning. So this is a really interesting topic for us because we've been working over the past year to think about how we think about partnership and how we measure partnership. And I'm interested in, Sally showed a very, her approach to monitoring or reviewing the partnership values. And I was interested, my question is related to that really, in terms of how you design a tool that recognizes power dynamics within your hub between partners, and how do you not push then your normative understandings of partnership within your hub? What we're finding is that you know, short of going out to everyone in the hub and asking for their opinions on what partnership looks like and means to them, which is a very lengthy and expensive exercise, what's the best way of coming up with a tool and an approach to monitoring partnership and these types of values that recognizes those power dynamics, I suppose?
Thanks, Lucy. Brilliant question, challenging question. So in terms of that survey, that's one of the ways in which we try to review our partnerships. And we co-designed the tool, the questionnaire together, and we got feedback from everyone on it. I don't think it is perfect. I think there's absolute room for adaptation. And I was really keen that we had the qualitative answers and text as well, rather than just the response to the Leichhardt scale of how you feel about those different questions. That gives us more nuance. I think some of that text does get to some of the power issues and how they play out. And we will repeat that exercise through time. We're aiming for once a year. We might do it more frequently. We can also adapt questions. So we can bring in new questions. Obviously, then it will be harder to do the comparison through time. But we wanted to have that as something that is anonymous. But then we also have reflective sessions in our workshops where people can write in the comments facility, and we're starting to use Fun Retro as well as something that's anonymous, where you can put in what you think is working well, what you think is working less well, what adaptations you would like to make. So the survey it happens once a year, but in our Arise Hub family meetings, we factor in space and time as well. You know, as Chris said, these issues take time, they take commitment. And we're also having a series of bilateral discussions across the whole partnership to have a sense of how our different leads feel that the project is working out, which has been helpful. So I think you need to have different types of mechanisms and not rely on one, because they're all going to reach different aspects of the issue. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's great.
Chris, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I fully agree with what Sally said. Well done.
Okay, great. We've got a question from Heather Oley.
It's actually more of a contribution than a question. Sorry, I wasn't clear, but over to you, Heather.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I was just highlighting in the chat box another piece of guidance, which is the Trust Global Code of Conduct for Research in Resource Poor Settings. Bit of a mouthful, but it's really straightforward 4-page document that aims to combat ethics dumping, but also is a really useful guide for equitable research partnerships. And it's based on 4 principles of fairness, respect, care, and honesty. So I'd encourage everyone to have a look at that. And we've adopted it in our university as a whole, but also it's now part of the ethics procedure that we have to go through to map projects onto this code. And we're about to publish some information about how we've embedded that with our work in Pakistan. So I'm happy to share that with this network when possible.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you very much for that. And we'll send these links around too from the chat. Shireen, are there other questions to come from the chat?
Just unmute myself. Vanessa Duclos, you had a point that you had typed in the in the chat. You'd said it wasn't really a question, more of a note. And given the nuance, I would rather that you voiced it yourself so that I don't mess it up. So go ahead, please, Vanessa.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, my point was more about, are you aware of how your respective teams entered into partnership and how the requests have been provided? Because the very word partnership might be interpreted a different way depending on the context, but also the first language. For instance, I'm French Canadian, and partnership has a financial connotation, if I can say so, and collaboration would be more towards equitable partnership, of what we mean by equitable partnership in English. So I don't know, was just more of a note, but if you are aware of any examples where this vocabulary or language barriers had influenced your partnerships within your teams.
Quick reaction from me. I completely agree with you that language is so important, and that we do understand and interrogate different terms, and we have shared views of those, or we adapt them accordingly. And I think for us in our check, if you like, it's the way we discussed it was that's how we check in on the values that we jointly agreed. So we linked it to the values and whether we need to make adaptations or whether we need to iterate in the values, etc. So fully agree, language is important. Dialogue and discussion around the questions and the terminology, very important.
Thank you, Sally.
So I would just add quick two things. I mean, one, I think that the language issue is key. I mean, I would 100% agree. But I think it comes out, to perhaps reiterate, Sally, it comes out in the discussion. So if you talk about partnerships and leave it there, but if you get into the detail of discussions, then the different understandings start to emerge, and that's when you really see that the importance of the issue. But I would add, as in addition to language, it's also history. In what I was talking about earlier, is to say the history of what these partnerships have been like before, and how that shapes then the expectations of this partnership, and good or bad sort of history of partnerships, then frame that and sort of getting to the point that you can say, no, we're not talking about a partnership like the bad ones that you've had before. We're talking about a different kind of partnership. Requires, again, some time and some discussion to get to a common understanding. So history as well.
But I am taking chair's prerogative here. I think that these language debates really play out on the SDGs. And when you look at SDG 17, equitable partnerships, a lot of it is about financial relationships. There's 2 targets on SDG 17 that are really much more about working together in collaboration, and equally, well, actually there's only one, I think it's 17.16, and I think by 17.17 we're already into good data, and how do we have good data. So this collaborative piece discursively, I think, has often in some quarters been left behind, and that's not a good thing. And it leaves us, it's harder to operationalize when we don't have the discursive background backing us up. So do we have any more questions? Shereen, is there any more raised hands?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Oh, the joys of working with Zoom. So I was blabbing away here. Yes, we have Dr. Antoinette Martins, who has a question to go. Over to you, Anna.
Hi, thank you very much for your talks. And I guess I have 2 questions. One follows on directly from the issue of language and culture. And I was wondering to those researchers who lead on these various hubs with partners all over the world, the questionnaires on satisfaction, let's say, have been administered in the native language of the researchers. And my second question has to do again with monitoring equitable and efficient partnerships, and whether it would be beneficial to have a completely external, unbiased agency attending meetings, for example, or monitoring studies, for example, in order to really see and evaluate partnerships without so much. Thank you.
So I'm
not
sure.
Chris?
Yeah.
So sure. I mean, just to say, I mean, on the language front, yeah. I mean, from the research point of view, it's everything is translated and back translated, and also discussed often at quite considerable length, in order to ensure a common understanding. In terms of the external, I mean, that's an interesting question, and to what extent these things need to be monitored externally. We haven't engaged in a process of external monitoring but of course people have recourse, I guess, to the funder. But what we've rather focused on, I think, is to try, and this is one of the challenges I raised, to try and capture some objective measures. And so that where there is a breach of some of these principles, that it becomes easier to see where they are, and so that people have grounds to frame the discussion more directly to particular breaches. But it is a challenge, and one I don't have an obvious answer to. But we're focused rather on the continual dialogue and the objective measures rather than an external system, if I understood correctly.
And just to add to that, we also haven't had an external evaluator on that, and the partnership check that I shared is in English only, so that is a limitation. And as I said earlier, so that's with everyone, all the researchers involved in the hub. I think it needs to not be the only thing we rely on. It needs to be one of many approaches. We see equitable partnerships as our joint responsibility. We need to learn through multiple forms. We need to innovate and respond as a hub, and we need to try and have the space for critical, open reflection. Thanks.
Sheila Mburu, please, your questions next.
Hi, Shireen, thank you. And thanks to all the speakers. It's been really interesting to hear all these takes on equitable partnerships, and I've definitely learned a lot. So I'm from UKCDR, which some of you have already mentioned. And obviously we've been doing lots of work on supporting funders to embed equitable partnership practices into the work that they do. Worked with Sally and the ORIs and the LSTM team on the safeguarding guidance. So it's been a really rich discussion, and I'm learning a lot, and I think a lot to take back to our work. I just wanted to respond to the comment I think Vanessa made about equitable partnerships resources, just to say, agree that it's always helpful to have them somewhere central, and that's something that we are thinking about in terms of how to pull those resources and have them somewhere centrally on our site or elsewhere, just to make them accessible to researchers and to funders. But yeah, I'll go back into listening mode because I'm finding the discussions really interesting. So thank you to everyone.
Okay, great. So is there any other questions?
Yes, we have Maria M. I've just passed your name. I think it's Mikhailopoulou. I don't want to get it wrong.
Very good effort, Serene. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone, and thank you for the excellent session, Claire, Alicia, and team. I'm Maria Mikhailopoulou. I'm the Hub Manager working on the Accelerate Hub with Greece. And this question is for Sally and Lynette, and thank you for your excellent presentations again. I had the benefit to hear about the fantastic work that the RISE Hub has been doing with your partnerships from the early days of this cohort. So I just want to focus a bit on the element of voice, which is behind equitable partnerships, and ask specifically if you could share with us, how do you kind of incorporate this element of voice from the people who live in these informal settlements, for the people you work with and you work for, if you like, into your equitable partnerships framework, if that makes sense. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. Lynette, I know you said you were having trouble with your connection. If you're with us, I'd love it if you could take that one and I can come in.
Yes, please. Thank you, Maria, for your question. I think it's elaborate. What I want to share is, for us, we embrace the voice of community. One, during our community engagement, we work with the community. So we talk to them and share with them what we do like to do so that they're part of us. Two, we are working with them as co-researchers so that when we are doing our activities, then we front them to work with us in ensuring that their voices are heard and that we are working with what they share and what they want us to do. Maybe Sally, you can give further input.
I thought that was a great answer. So we have community-based participatory research at the heart of ARISE that is working, as Lynette has explained, with co-researchers who are living and working in informal settlements. We have a range of different methods in which to engage and understand their perspectives and to build together strategies to enhance accountability, governance, and health and well-being. And there's some nice examples on the website, so of ways in which voice has been shared and amplified. So please do go and have a look at that. I'll put the website in the chat, and grateful for any further thoughts or feedback too. Thanks. I hope that's okay.
Okay, great, thank you. I guess I've got one question for the group now. Do you think interdisciplinarity has inhibited or accelerated your ability to create value in partnerships across your hubs? Because most partners, or a lot of our partners, don't have experience in interdisciplinary research. And has that been a barrier or a challenge?
From our side, I mean, I think it's helped, but perhaps from a different route. So we've pushed on the interdisciplinary front, and we have a work package which is focused on innovation, which is particularly designed around sort of interdisciplinary approaches. And the workshops that we've held there and brought people together have actually been a place where we've been able to create an environment where there's quite open discussion, and really trying to examine some of the underlying issues, so some of the questions about voice, for example, or it's questions about participation, the questions about engagement. And so it's really actually helped because, you know, in many, you know, I'm an economist, for example, we don't have any values whatsoever. And so, you know, bringing in some of the inputs from the other disciplines has forced us to not only apply that to our work, but to apply that to ourselves. And so to bring that application to ourselves has actually proved hugely beneficial. And by using the mechanisms of the workshops, and now we do online working groups and so forth, I think has allowed discussions which would not have occurred if we had stuck to the more sort of core elements or the core types of research methods that we have used. So I think it's been a key strength for us. One I actually hadn't thought about in this context, but now that you ask it, I think it's actually helped us move along a lot. And some of these issues, for example, about dealing with the systemic racism and imposition, all of these things. I mean, it's helped again by having this broad range of inputs from different disciplines. Has really helped us examine things, as I say, for our research, but for ourselves as well.
Wow, great. Sally, do you have anything to offer before we wrap up?
I mean, just to pick up on the earlier discussions about language and concepts and normative phrasing and how they can really vary across disciplines. So in ARISE, we have economists, we have development, we have geography, we have gender and health, we have quantitative, we have qualitative, we have medicine, we have diversity in disciplines, and we try to bring people from different disciplines into our thematic working group So we have 3 thematic working groups which are overarching and are shaping our COVID case study, which is our responsiveness to COVID. And I think you have to really listen and learn and engage so that you know that you're speaking a similar language. And I think that that can help build trust and can help build partnerships. And different disciplines bring different ideas to the table around collaboration and partnership. So I think it does help, but I think it can take time to build spaces where we all understand each other to bring our different disciplinary perspectives to the table.
Okay, that's wonderful. So I'm going to ask you guys for your sort of just to pick a key message and talk on it as we wrap up, because I know we're getting close on time. So Chris, do you want to go first? What would your key priority message be for the audience?
This is hard, and it requires continual reevaluation and continual effort, or it will just get lost.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Sally?
Yeah, mine's pretty similar. Equity in partnership. It takes time, it takes responsiveness, and it takes that sense of building a trusting family where we can be open and critique each other. And I think we need multiple methods in which to assess, analyze, and be responsive.
Sorry, had muted. So for me, the context of equity and partnerships, I think working with the vulnerable, working with the marginalized, I think we need to have a high index of suspicion and open our eyes to seeing and supporting the community members that you're working with. Thank you.